Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host Rory Bryce, and this week I'm joined by Stephen Brandt. How are you doing, mate?
Not bad. It's actually fun to be on a pod that I'm not hosting.
Well, thanks very much for coming on. I hope it's not too different being in the hot seat for a change instead of hosting. Stephen's inclusion in today's episode means that today we're going to be talking about Chivas USA, the last franchise and club from the MLS to dissolve, which has a lot of interesting implications in itself, I think. They existed for 10 years, 2004 to 2014, and were an offshoot of Mexican club CD Guadalajara, who themselves are associated with the Chivas brand and company. So there's quite a lot to unpack here, but first of all, Stephen, did you ever see Chivas USA play a match, or did your own team play them, for instance? Let's just jump right into things.
Well, the last time I was out in LA, we didn't even have a league, and that was 1989. I mean, it's one of the things people don't really truly get about the United States is how for me in Buffalo to get out to LA, it was be like for people in Ireland to get to Morocco, basically. It's not cheap, but I mean, it's fun if you get in a bus and just drive out there. There were some players that came through there. Juan Pablo Angel was there for a bit. This was the part of MLS after 2001 where Don Garber contracted the two teams in Florida, where they were trying to get foreign teams to have their hands in MLS to get some money in there, because the problem with the old NASL was that it got too big too fast, and too many people that didn't know the sport tried to pump money into it. And that's what they were afraid of. When Garber took over in 2001 as commissioner, the league was basically bankrupt. So they had to get mega donors in here to get the team started. The problem with Chivas is that in LA, you're not going to have one team. It's like in Glasgow. How many teams in Glasgow are there? So that was a real plight for Los Angeles to do that. And also, it was the owner of Chivas Guadalajara wanted to have an only Mexican type roster, which would have been fine. I mean, some of the offshoots of players that have come out of there. I mean, Hugo Torres came out of there in that generation. I mean, he's rounded next to nothing. But I mean, football is littered with players that have come through and supposed to be the next greatest thing and ended up being nothing. I mean, we didn't need an Ali Dia for that over here. But Los Angeles is like London in a way, is that there's too much going on. And at that point, you had the LA Lakers really hitting big as far as Kobe was still there. You had Phil Jackson. I just read Phil Jackson's book. It was freaking hilarious. But so there was a lot of things to not focus on. Plus, you've got all of it's a nice city to go to. So you weren't going to get many people to go in to do it. And going into Carson, you can't park anywhere near it. So you got to get on the buses. The busing system's old and underfunded. So it fell apart. And Americans, God forbid, I mean, we have got the glory hunter stereotype on us, and most of it's rightfully so. I mean, you see us over here opining over Wrexham right now, when I mean you could point up how many other Americans are owning teams. I mean, my third book is on Crystal Palace, and there's Americans in that team, but no, we won't do that. So that was part of the problem. Plus, they really didn't play. They would go through coaches like Real Madrid or Inter does. I mean, it was one run after another, and you need consistency in the sport.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And I know in the case of the owner of Chivas USA and CD Guadalajara as well, a man by the name of George Vergara, he caused a bit of a stir as owner of both clubs and was actually quite a controversial figure as well. I mean, I don't want to say he was unpopular because I don't know too much about that, but it was certainly controversial, I think it's fair to say.
Oh, yes, he's not well thought of.
Well, I suppose that answers that then. I'm guessing that it wasn't very popular then in that case. So, in short, for our listeners, am I right in saying that George Vergara wanted to have a club in the USA for Mexican players, Mexican fans, and to represent the Mexican diaspora, where Chivas USA would be treated sort of like a feeder club or a partner club? So as well as representing the Mexican diaspora in America, it would also be a club where players from the Mexican League and CD Guadalajara would be sent on loan, and stuff like that. So, kind of like a partner club, and that's my take on it anyway.
Well, yeah, but that's ideally what MLS should be, to be honest with you. I mean, you don't need to bring over every broken down old player from Europe to come over here. I mean, Chicharito's over here, and what have we heard? I mean, he's not broken down or old. He's just fat and partying in LA. I mean, you should be able to, in Central and Latin America, bring up young players, get them good, and then reap the benefits off of the transfer budget. And he had the right idea, because, if you don't have a player quota overseas, you get a young player from Latin America, it will keep growing from there.
Of course, yeah. I mean, to me, to be honest, it just never really seemed like he put the infrastructure in place for the club to grow. To me, it more seemed like he put all of his eggs in one basket and banked on a large proportion of the Mexican diaspora living in LA to come out and support this club, which, you can't just take away fans from clubs that they might already support just because it's a club that's claiming to represent you. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, but you're also going to realize how close Mexico is to LA. I'm not going to quite say it's walking distance, but it's not even that much of a day trip. So I did it in the 80s with my family. You're not going to be able to split a Mexican crowd or any type of crowd. Imagine going to Boston right now, which is mostly Irish, and plopping down a Celtic right there and saying that's all you're going to watch. Now, how many Irish people are Celtic fans? But not some, but you've got other teams there. So you sectioned off what you could follow. And at that point, what people don't realize when you look at it overseas, now you guys have TV and rights fees a lot different than what we have. At that time, we were only getting very little amount of games overseas and in Mexico. We had Telemundo, we had Univision, but it was not like, hey, let's watch everything. We weren't at that yet. That doesn't come around until Beckham retires. So like right now, I could be sitting here talking to you with Belgium up on my computer and having another one out with watching Croatia, because I could get everything. At that time, it wasn't. So you had the enclaves of Mexicans that were watch the other teams too. Why? Why bring a team up here where that's, unless they're internationally known, why do it?
So basically, they shut out a huge market of fans by excluding a massive demographic right from the start.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what they did. And it's the same thing when with Atletico in Ottawa and the team that went into Oklahoma City about 10 years ago.
Okay. This is the thing, isn't it? It comes back to the how and why football clubs are formed in communities in the first place. It's all about need, it's about demand, it's about having the community there who want to make it successful, but it's also about laying down enough roots that people will continue to come and see your club, and they'll eventually view your football club as an extension of their values and beliefs, a reflection of what they want, and see it ultimately as an extension of themselves. It becomes part of their identity, and that's how it becomes a larger institution within a community. And more often than not, clubs will cease to exist because they can't get support, and they fail to maintain that identity because they never really had that support from the start. I hope that kind of makes sense. A lot of it was kind of jargon, but that's just my opinion on it, and from the research that I've done into clubs like this is what you often find. And at the end of the day, alienating fan bases and not communicating with supporters is one way to ensure that you won't get anyone along. You can't just show up and say that you represent a people and then expect them to follow you. You can't just pry people away from the teams that they support already. It's just it's a complete nonsense. You have to have the roots, you have to have the history, and you have to have the backing before you even start to consider doing something like that. I mean, even if you take the bigger hitters like LA Galaxy, for instance, I mean, LA Galaxy, I think, have been around for a long time. And they have that history, they have that backing to be able to get fans along. You can't just say to an LA Galaxy fan who's been supporting them their full lives, you're Mexican, so now you support Chivas USA, you know?
Well, what has always made LA Galaxy go as much is that they've always had the star players. I mean, they had Landon Donovan, they had Alexi, they had the star players. LA is not somewhere where you can develop and have an underdog team. That just does not happen there. That's over many, many sports and many, many generations. I mean, look at the old LA Aztecs. I mean, once they got rid of Price, Best, and Rinish Michaels, they fell apart. So you have to have the top players. And if you're going to go in there and not bring in like a Hugo Sanchez or big names, forget it. It's not going to work. LA is a vapid city.
So I'm guessing then, like, LAFC, who haven't long joined the MLS, are taking lessons from what happened at Chivas USA and deciding to not do it that way.
Well, you couldn't do it the same way again. Now, also, they've had the added advantage is that the LA Galaxy, since Robbie Keane and Landon Donovan have left, have just completely thrown up on themselves out there. I mean, yes, they had Zlatan here, but Zlatan was only going to play for 6 months, maybe a year at the most. I mean, yeah, he's still, I think, part of AC Milan. Yeah. I have no idea with him, but he's like, what, 40 at the most? So they didn't put anything behind them. Now, I mean, they have Ricky Pugh here. LAFC coming in, being the bright thing, made it easier because there is an LA Galaxy to play right there off of it where they're good. Now, the El Traficos have been pretty decent, but, I mean, the LA Galaxy needs to get their crap in gear really quick because they're bleeding fans.
I mean, to be fair, and with respect to the other clubs that are in the MLS and the MLS in general, most of the American teams that I know and became aware of, I suppose, from an early age were through video games, and LA Galaxy I'd consider to be one of, if not the big hitter in the league, but maybe that's just because that's my generation, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's the same thing for over here. I mean, 90% of the teams that I know of are through FIFA and Football Manager. I mean, that, to be blunt, that's how I started writing my first book in my next 6, basically, to be fair. But it's going to take a while. LA Galaxy's got to get their stuff in gear, but it's cyclical. MLS is not like League of Ireland or Championship or the SPL, where you can have a dynasty. I mean, in the early days in MLS, the team is DC United. I mean, they were so good, in fact, that one of the many stops Ian Rush had, they talked to him to bring him over here. And he would have torn the league up in the late 90s easily. And that's what they have to do. The problem is LA keeps going after the older players. I'm sure they did try to go after Cristiano Ronaldo. I'm sure they did go after Messi, and they will go after Mbappe. That's what they'll do. I mean, look at what Atlanta United did. They took a whole bunch of players out of Argentina and won in their 3rd year.
Well, there's certainly always been a team that go for a statement signing, but it sounds like it's always just kind of been a bit of a quick fix, I suppose, when they do that. But, you know, of course, and there's different aspects to this as well, but you get a big name in, you start selling more jerseys with that name on the back of it, you know, so a lot of it can be marketing, I think, has been brought to the fore recently. A lot of it can be PR, partnerships, and so, you know, there's a whole bunch of other aspects that are involved with it, but generally speaking, I'd agree with you, it's a wee bit more of a quick fix and statement signings, you know.
Well, that was the point, because what MLS wanted was their Real Madrid, Barcelona's, Man United, Arsenal's. I mean, it had the academy wing and the international wing of Celtic been smarter, and I've talked to them on this a number of times, they could have had their own team over here. They could have been one of those funding funding the teams over here, because Bayern Munich basically takes the academy from FC Dallas and brings them over every year. So, I mean, it's LA Galaxy wanted to be the Galacticos. The problem is the Galacticos they kept bringing over were about 10 years past what Real Madrid would do. Because, and I do not like saying anything good about Real Madrid, but what they do is they get them early and then they get rid of them as quickly as possible. I mean, as soon as Real Ronaldo's knees went out, he was gone. As soon as Michael Owen wanted to go back, he was gone. They don't keep him around for sentimental value. You're gone.
It's part of the ruthlessness of football, isn't it? And it's some of it is that, I suppose, player trade model, if you want to call it that. But it is ruthlessness as well. And as you said, there's no sentimentality and there's no room for sentimentality. And it is something that I do kind of agree with. If you want to run a team successfully, then that is something that you need to stick to. Just before we come back on to Chivas USA a little bit, I know we've discussed MLS. I just wanted to come back to a point that you made a moment ago, Stephen. Obviously, you said the MLS is different to other leagues, particularly in Europe, where you can't really have a dynasty or you can't really have a one-club league with one team splitting them or one team coming up every so often. Would you say that that's because of the amount of money that's put into the MLS and because of the franchise side of things? Do you think there's other reasons? Do you think it's the competitiveness of the teams, or do you think it's from a top-down level? I just wanted to know your thoughts on that before we go back on to Shiva.
Oh, there's not enough points in the day for me to get into what the problem is with that. Trust me, I've got 12 years of podcasts online to point out why MLS is bad. Okay, roughly to give you the Spark Notes version of it. What MLS is it's essentially owned league where all of the teams are owned, but they're operated by the home office. So the leg structure, I mean, think about it this way. What would Chelsea do if they could only sign 4? They could only have 3 top players. That's it.
They might end up being successful for a start, but that's just my own view.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a Chelsea fan. There's a really bad picture on MySpace of like almost 20 years ago of me in a Chelsea jersey. But I'm glad Ashton Kutcher didn't kick my old icon back on. But roughly the league system has it set up in such a way where the league wasn't going to go bankrupt post 2004. There are roster rules, discovery claims, international spots, a draft, free agency. Oh, I could get into it. There is no league system. There is no pyramid. You don't like. What would really get this league going is that LA Galaxy's bad at 1 year and they have to fight off relegation. What if Louisville City FC can come up and get that parachute payment? What is that? $100 billion to go up into EPL? I mean, what if you could do that? I mean, there's no intent for any of these teams to do that well. They're going to make money somewhat.
Yeah, again, really good point, and I completely agree with everything they said. It's a total mix of different issues about it, and I think the MLS is growing. I think we just said to each other off air, actually, the MLS is obviously growing. The last decade or so, it's really grown, especially over here, and it's going to continue to grow. That's just the way it is. But in some ways, it almost feels like it's still finding its feet with some things. Maybe not in terms of its growth or in terms of the teams that are established. But to me, anyway, and again, this is just my perspective, it's always seemed like it's teetering.
Oh, no. I think I don't think they expected to expand and be this good this fast. I think they were trying to slow roll it out like a lot of the other leagues were, because most of home office and MLS came from the NFL. So it was slow roll. I think they were surprised with how quickly post 2014 the league exploded around the world. You're seeing players get transferred out of here for massive amounts of money. stuff that they never thought they would see. I mean, they basically had to swallow 99% of Beckham's contract to get him over here. Now you have players looking at MLS as a stopping point to go overseas. You could take some of the players from like Uruguay, from Latin America, finish them here, and then get them overseas. As far as having great enough talent, I think within the next 10 years, you're going to have to take all the roster and all the rules off the league. It's doing really, really well. I'm very happy to see that it is. Now, likewise, for us, I've bought tickets for 4 games for me and my father, and I've always worked in kind of low blue-collar type of jobs. Very reasonable. I have bought tickets in 3 big markets for the equivalent of about $100 total for 2 people. That's light years less than anything else. Now, I live in Buffalo, New York. I can walk down the street to an NHL game. I can get on the bus to the Buffalo Bills, and it's going to be 3 times more expensive. I can jump the border to Toronto and go see the baseball team, and it would be reasonable, but it's nowhere near as good as MLS is.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it seems to have really cornered the market in terms of affordability for tickets as well. So yeah, it's accessible, which is good as well. Obviously, relatively speaking, for myself, that would still seem quite steep. But obviously, the standard of the league is different. The way the leagues are set up are different, and the way the teams that do things are different. So that's an entire conversation altogether. But I just want to come back to Chivas USA a little bit just before we go even more off topic, because we could talk all night about this, and I know we are meant to talk about the MLS, but we mentioned some of the players that were coming through and some of the players that perhaps LA Galaxy had compared to who Chivas had. But obviously, Chivas didn't have any players to the extent the Galaxy did in terms of stature, in terms of reputation, and maybe even in terms of skill as well. But they did still have some quite successful players, and I'm right in saying that some of the playing staff and the coaching staff actually won a few yearly awards. Is that right? I think one of them was Brad Guzan. Is it the goalkeeper?
But yeah, Brad Guzan was not a naturally. I think he came through in Europe and came back over here. That's the thing that at that time MLS didn't have, is they weren't developing as well. I mean, the classic case is the 14-year-old Freddie Adu. Because there's no way in hell that one. I mean, Freddie Adu is still young enough to be playing. He hasn't played in 5 years. Yeah, there were some players. I mean, Sasha Kleishin came through. He was a defender on the U.S. national team. Brad Guzan was in many World Cups for U.S. I mean, he just wasn't at Qatar because he had a bad injury, and plus there's Matt Turner just blew everybody's mind out of the water with how well he was playing. So I mean, they did have some, but if you do a starting a grade 11 of what the Galaxy has, it was night and day better, night and day.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing as well. It's going to be relative. Obviously, Galaxy have been around for a lot longer than Chivas were. I should say, but they still had a little bit of success. So, and I think there's always some issue surrounding them, whether it's growing too quickly for their means. You know, we've spoken about that before, the fire burning too quickly and burning out too fast, whether it's been dodgy owners ripping the rug out from underneath them and taking all their money away, or whether it's been something that they've not actually been able to financially recover from. There's been a number of issues around it, but for the most part anyway, Chivas seemed reasonably well put together up until a certain point, and they seemed like they kind of had their act together in terms of where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do, and they did get a little bit of success off that. So I mean, their first season wasn't very successful, but they did end up hiring Bob Bradley, which was a big statement from them, and actually ended up being a little bit of a turning point for them, didn't it?
He had a Brian Clough turn at Swansea.
Aye, that's right, Swansea. I think I remember reading that. I tried to think about that in person, but I wasn't really watching the English Premier League at that time. So, but I did remember reading about that. So he became manager, and he'd done so well he actually ended up getting hired into the US men's national team setup. And that was after picking up another MLS Coach of the Year award, which is great. So obviously that's a huge signing for a club that's only been around for a couple of years, and I think that gives you a bit of an insight into just how the MLS operates in terms of the finances and people they look to pick up as well. But most interestingly for me, and you know, this is just a kind of little side point, he was also the manager of Metro Stars, who of course became New York Red Bulls, so he was obviously a well-known veteran of the game in the US. And when I was looking at this, the one thing that kind of stuck in my mind was that this was a very shrewd appointment for Chivas USA.
Well, yeah, and he had also been part of the Chicago Fire teams in the '90s too. I mean, Bob Bradley is the all everything at Toronto FC right now, and his son played overseas at Aston Villa. That's Michael Bradley's father. So he was and he got screwed over with the U.S. national team. Klinsman's not thought of very highly around here, even though he lived in LA since the '90s.
I mean, obviously, in terms of Shiva, they had this little bit of early success.
So in 2007, they won the Western Conference, which was 2 or 3 years into their existence, if my maths is correct. Actually, just for our listeners, Stephen, could you explain the league formats in the MLS for us?
Well, think of it this way: Western and Eastern Conference would be like the Premier League and the Championship. It's the same thing, but it's on the same level, because there aren't levels here. There is somewhat of one, and if you looked at the pyramid of the United States, you guys being overseas would just shake your heads and walk away. Trust me, because I've coached and done PR in all levels. It's ugh. But
yeah, that's one of the things, because I read about Detroit City FC in a book called the Roaring Red Front, and in that book they discussed the fan culture around Detroit City FC and how it's quite community focused, not necessarily fan owned. I think, could be wrong, but how it has a large focus in the community. And they basically said if Detroit continue being successful and then wanted to go to the MLS, they would lose all of that because they would have to sell themselves franchise. So obviously the pyramid system that isn't really a pyramid system is quite convoluted in that side of things. But
like my local team, FC Buffalo, has been around for almost 12 years, and they're the third team to be in here, and they just moved up to the next level up, which is basically pro, and that took them a lot out of there. But having the Western and Eastern Conference, that's because we have playoffs, because God forbid we do a single table and let it do it the right way. I mean, that's why I only play MLS and Football Manager, because it has at least the international system in it.
Yeah, got it. I mean, it's one thing I suppose I've always found a bit strange in just how it is. I always actually just put it down to how the league was run. But again, we can maybe talk about that in a little bit later on. In terms of Chivas, though, they had this little bit of success. They won they won the Western Conference, and they also managed to make it to the semi-final of the MLS Cup in 2007 as well, losing out to Kansas City Wizards. So they had a little bit of a cup run. They played in the Superliga, which was a competition played between teams from the US and teams from Mexico. So they actually had quite a bit of fun. It sounds like it seems like it was maybe, for the reasons we've discussed, hindsight's a great thing, obviously. It wouldn't have been so, but for the early years, the first wee while, it seems like they would have been quite good to follow, or quite good to watch at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, there was that, but you also got to remember at the same point that 2008 is about the time Beckham starts coming over. So, and the games weren't really put on that well. ESPN would throw them on around bowling and pinochle and competitive log throwing. I wish I was joking on that one. So you would have to section it around here. They did well enough. I mean, some of those teams in that era were doing decently, but you got to remember there were not that many teams at that point.
Yeah, sure, I do get that. I mean, the weird thing for me was how quickly their attendances dropped off, I think. Was there a reason behind that, do you think, Stephen?
You've got to remember the Carson Stadium is no bigger than Kentworth Road. So when you're saying a dip from 14 to 7, that's the same thing as what Luton does. So you're not over here outside of the big teams like maybe Seattle, Atlanta, New York, and DC going to have a big stadium. I mean, New York Red Bull have a massive stadium. If they actually started bringing in top talent, they could fill that thing. It's on the same wavelength of probably Birmingham City or maybe Hibernian's stadium. So I mean, you're not going to get anything big there, and they had to switch on and off with LA Galaxy. So whatever LA Galaxy had would probably be the total what that is. But at the same point, if you're not putting out anything good for Chivas, why are you going to get on the buses? Why are you going to go through Carson, spend the almost $10, $11 for a beer to just see nothing? And keep in mind, here in the States, we can bring our food to our seat. You guys can't, which is annoying as hell when I see that.
No, wait, we can bring our food to our seat. Or do you mean like you can bring foods into the actual stadium from outside?
No, aren't you guys not able to bring like your beer and stuff to your seat?
In Scotland, alcohol is completely banned from stadiums. They've actually just started phasing back in. So Celtic have trialled it where they have some beers for sale for like 2 hours before kickoff in a concourse, as long as it's not in view of the pitch. And I think that's the blanket law in England as well. So you can sell beer at stadiums in England as long as it's not in view of the pitch. But that's just in the English Football League. And I don't think it's in the National League or the Conference, but I could be wrong. But in Scotland, up until very, very recently, and I mean recently being the last couple of months, you have not been allowed alcohol in the stadium whatsoever. So obviously, Shiva, all these things are happening. You know, they're doing okay in the park. They've got some players being nominated for Player of the Year. The manager, they've got a good manager, and you know things are going okay. And then all of a sudden, it starts slowing down, and not just slowing down. The brakes kind of come to a complete halt. So they lose a couple of players. Vergara becomes sole owner of the club. He buys out his partners. They start going through coaches at an alarming rate. And that mirrors what was going on at Sede Guadalajara as well at the same time. So Vergara is becoming a bit of an authoritarian owner, if you like, a bit of a dictator, and he's just going nuts with it. And then all of a sudden, the MLS buy Shiva from Vergara, and they can't find a buyer from them. That's to go from just kind of founding and then doing okay for 4 or 5 years to this happening seems like quite a change.
Well, part of it was because at that point there was a real movement to get troublesome owners out of the leagues. I mean, that's about the same time the LA Clippers owner was taken out, which was rightfully so. Donald Sterling was a real prick for 25 years. So, I mean, Vergara, they purposely went in there. There's more to that than they can be really said on a pod, because you could talk about it even further. But Nelson Rodriguez went in there to help stabilize everything. And he ironically went into Chicago Fire about 5 years ago and tried to pull the same thing there. And they wanted to get a good enough owner in there to actually put some money into it. And they couldn't at that time, because, I mean, that's 2014. We're just getting over the economic meltdown over here. So, I mean, nobody wanted to really buy too much. And you didn't have the explosion of money. Now, the franchise fee is something like $300 billion. It's something obscene now. To get in. I mean, Beckham's entrance fee was because it was his contract from when he brought him over here, something like $3.9 million. It's now something obscene. Because like St. Louis FC had St. Louis City FC, sorry, I know too many there, was something big. So they wanted to pump the money in, but they couldn't find anybody. And they tried to run Beckham over there to do it, but his wife wanted Miami because of her fashion, which I don't blame her. I don't like the state of Florida whatsoever. It's all sports related, but I have a lot of irrational hatreds in sports.
No, I get that as well. I mean, I'm the same. I've got a lot of irrational hatreds as well. It's just one of those things that you just develop unrealistic hatreds for football clubs you never thought you would.
And obviously, what ended up happening with Shiva, it's happened to so many clubs as well. But the thing is, I think there's still a bit of an exoticism around the MLS and how the MLS works over here. And that's maybe what attracts people to look at the stories from it. But was it just a case that they were trying to get rid of problematic owners and then they got rid of them, they bought the club and they couldn't find a buyer? But were there other things going on in the background as well? I know Vergara was at fault for the amount of coaches that were going through, but surely that must have led to a decline in the amount of people going to see them.
Oh, of course. I mean, you see that. I mean, we saw that with Southampton this year when you keep running teams through and you transfer out players, people will stop showing up. Now, it's a little bit different for you guys over there than it is for us, because usually when MLS is going on, we've got baseball going on or hockey going on. So there's other things for us to get watching. And to be honest, in LA, do you want to be sitting inside or out on a beach out in Laguna or out in Laurel Canyon? I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, I live in Buffalo, New York, and I'm out walking around most of the time. So, and I'm not trying to knock anything about my city at this point.
Yeah, I hear you. And just out of curiosity, what's the feeling like knowing that the US is going to be joint hosting the World Cup in 2026? There must be some buzz about the place for it.
It's a massive help. I mean, fortunately, this time when America got the sport, we actually have more than just a thought of the sport. I mean, I'm wearing a jersey of a team in a amateur division in Rhode Island. Now I know the owner, so that's what I've got 3 others from other stuff here. So, I mean, people are looking forward to it. I mean, they're putting them in pretty big cities that already have stadiums, so you don't have to build anything. I mean, there are a couple of them you're going to have to do some stuff to. I mean, that's just what it is. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun here in the States. Now they're going to price gouge us out the wazoo because that's just what FIFA does to everything. They come in, take all the money, and then proclaim that they need more money. But that's just it's going to be fun. There's going to be a lot, and there's going to be a lot coming up. And I have a feeling we will see a pretty good World Cup in 2026.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for it myself. I mean, me and some pals are saving up to go over because we'll all be turning 30 around that point. So it'll be a nice celebration.
Fingers crossed Scotland actually managed to make it, but I'm never hopeful.
Yeah, that's what a lot. It's funny. My dad went over to Scotland about 4 years ago, and he decided that he wanted to get me a Scottish jersey, which is fine. So he's like, "Well, tell me the history of it." I'm like, "Well, let's just say they're the Cleveland Browns of the sport. They were really good in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then just the FA got in front of itself and took in all the money for themselves and decided not to update the sport. I have a lot of issues with the Scottish FA.
Trust me, so do I. It has a history of being a mess, and it's not really changed.
Well, one final question I actually had for you, Stephen, and this is something that I'm quite interested in. It's about MLS expansion. So obviously there's currently no promotion or relegation, but they're planning to expand to 32 teams, I think it is. I just wanted to ask what the limit on this is going to be, and at what point do either the MLS or the fans say enough is enough?
Oh, do not Google that online. Do not Google MLS and promotion and relegation, you'll have even worse of a drinking habit. Trust me, because I've got one because of it. As if the money dries up, that's what will happen. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, that's the only reason why they brought in the Cascadia teams, the old NASL teams. I mean, is to get the money. That's it. That's why San Diego's being unveiled today for the 30th team. Now, do they bring in Vegas and Phoenix? Does the Sacramento Republic get off their backsides and actually come back in? I mean, do we get Aberdeen of South Dakota FC United Albion? I mean, who knows at this point? Don Garber has said within the next 5 years he's going to retire. I know he's not a healthy man. He's got some stuff with him. It just depends on what they want to do. I hope they stop at 30, but considering the fact that Major League Baseball is going to add another team, NHL is going to add more teams, I'm pretty sure the NFL is going to do it. You never know.
I suppose you don't want to end up turning into a situation like you have in Argentina with the AFA, where they're adding new teams, they're expanding the top tier some seasons, and then the next season they'll cut it down again, and then they'll expand it even more the next season. And their promotion, not their promotion, the relegation system is obviously based on the team's average position or average points over 3 seasons or something like that. It's very, very complicated as well. And their fans are absolutely furious with it just because of the constant changes. So I suppose there's a risk that something like that might happen. But I suppose
the AFA makes the Scottish FA look normal.
It does. It really, really does. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
But I think that'll do us for now. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me tonight to talk about Chivas USA. I know we kind of took went off on a lot of tangents, but I think it's quite important to mention the MLS, the way the MLS is managed and set up and regulated as part of the Chivas USA story, because you can't really talk about any MLS club without talking about how the MLS is run, that I found, particularly if the club ends up going defunct. And there's a lot of cases of this in the US, not necessarily of clubs going defunct, but of franchises being moved, as we know in other sports. And, it's happened in the MLS before. It probably will happen in the MLS again. So, really, really fascinating episode, and good to chat about all the things surrounding football, or soccer, I should say, in America as well. I think Chivas USA is definitely a club that's worth revisiting in the future. There's a lot more we could say about them, and I'd quite like to delve a little bit further into the intricacies of Jorge Vergara and how they folded, and this whole connection with CD Guadalajara. But that'll be an episode for another day. To our listeners, thanks once again for tuning in to listen to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch with us to discuss a topic, or think that there's something that we should be covering, please get in touch. You can find us on X at _footballheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. We're happy to have a chat with you guys as well of anything surrounding football, history, heritage, identity, culture, community, all the fun things that we've been speaking about on this podcast so far. So please feel free to get in touch. But for now, Stephen, say goodbye.
Good night.
That's a goodbye from me as well, and we'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.